Hi, thanks for joining me. Welcome to this video. It's all about getting lost. Well, I know people can get lost these days, but not in the way you could before smartphones became ubiquitous and everyone had like a smartphone in their hand which could tell them exactly where they needed to be and, more importantly, where they needed to go. Now, for most of human history, of course, there was no such thing, but it is hard to imagine a time without smartphones because they basically dominate our lives. It wasn't until 2012, 2013 that more than 50% of people had a smartphone, and that's when I think everything really changed in terms of walking around and finding your way. I admit that I'm a smartphone addict and I kind of compulsively look at it, and it's got to the point now that even where I'm going to somewhere that I know where it is, I will still reflexively look at my phone because it's almost like I've lost the ability to find my own way. It's basically the iPhone that changed everything. Obviously, smartphones had existed before the iPhone.
Come on. Yeah, this was made by IBM and Bell South in 1994. I actually used this brick back in the day.
But they weren't very easy to use. They were things like the BlackBerry, which is a kind of odd flip-out thing. It was mostly used in the city. You could type emails on it. You could look at the financial news. And then, very oddly, it was used in the 2011 riots in London to coordinate gangs of looters. And so what they found, much like Prince Andrew, is that there is, in fact, such a thing as bad publicity. Not all publicity is good. But anyway, I digress. What I want to talk about is the whole phenomenon of getting lost and finding your way when you didn't have this amazing device in your hand to tell you where you want to go. So I'm going to go through some of the ways that people got lost, finding their way. And I'm also conducting an experiment. I was in Rome for the first time, a city I don't know. And so what I tried to do was to navigate as far as it was possible without a smartphone. I mean, within reason. I didn't want to waste kind of valuable holiday time getting completely lost, but I did want to see what it was like trying to use a paper map. What was the kind of digital era like? Well, of course, the first and most obvious way of finding your route and not getting lost was simply remembering it, and that might seem obvious, but that was a fundamental skill that humans had to have. Hunter-gatherers in an era before any kind of written record simply had to remember where they were going. It's like a black cab driver in London these days has a overly developed frontal cortex for storing spatial information. I mean, here's an example of the kind of stuff that we would just remember. People's phone numbers. Everyone carried with them 20 or 30 phone numbers and addresses just in their heads. We just knew it. I think that part of the brain has just now been taken over with TikToks of people twerking and a duck that's made friends with a dog, that kind of thing. I think it's just displaced it. But yeah, you would know all these phone numbers. I realised about 2 weeks ago, I wasn't 100% sure what my wife's phone number was. Let me explain. She has a number that I've known for ages, and then she's got a work phone, which she basically has been using for some time. Recently. I say recently, 9 years. But it occurred to me I didn't actually know it. And what that means is that if I was in some kind of accident and I couldn't access my phone, someone needed to make an emergency contact, I wouldn't even be able to tell them what my wife's phone number was. I don't know, what kind of scenario where I couldn't use my hands to operate a phone. Maybe like that terrible case where the woman lost her hands in a shark attack. Maybe that had happened. Although that was an interesting case. I don't believe the first iteration of the news, because the first iteration is poor woman had her hands bitten off, and essentially the Bahamian, it happened in the Bahamas, the Bahamian police blamed her. They said she'd literally been asking for it and had provoked the shark. It was a sort of variation of the short skirt, that's why you got attacked scenario. And then it turns out that what had actually happened is the shark had come in and bit her on the leg. She then tried to defend herself, push it away, and then bitten her hands off. So horrible story. Not really sure it's appropriate for this video. Don't believe everything you read in the Bahamian media. So we would remember stuff. We just have this knowledge in our minds. And so that was what I guess that's where the map, the phone numbers, all that kind of thing. And you had address book. You had to be very careful not to lose your address book. And also, if you were trying to meet girls or meet boys or whatever, you'd have to try and remember their numbers. It was or write it down on your sweaty hand, or maybe somebody give you the wrong number. The important thing was you couldn't take out, you had a master address book. That was very precious, where everyone, and you mustn't take that out, because if you lost that, you literally lost all records of people's addresses. Although you could go to a phone book, which are these massive lumps of paper, which were delivered to everyone's addresses. They were also very useful for the police because you could roll them up, and it was a way of beating suspects without leaving a mark. In the era of getting lost, the other thing that you would do, and this to a British person might seem horrific, is you would go up to a stranger and ask for directions. I mean, you did it all the time. Thinking back to how we got to various places, you just didn't have enough information, even if you had a map, and I'll be talking about those in a bit. There was no way that you could get from your starting point to your destination without asking for directions. Now, these days, if someone comes up to you and asks for directions, it's a reasonable assumption that they are trying to rob you. That is the only, because you think, well, why are you asking me? You have a smartphone, just look in it. Although, a couple of weeks ago, Chinese lady came up to me and my wife. It was Hyde Park. We walked through Hyde Park in the evening. She said, "I'm really sorry, my phone is running out of battery and I'm off to see a musical, and I know that I'm close, but I don't know sort of do the final route." And we sort of looked at where she wanted to go, said, "Oh, that's fine, just go with us." So that actually was a legitimate reason. She did tell us 3 times what the musical was, and we were not able to understand it. But then when we arrived at the theatre, we were like, Hamilton, I see it. So the problem with asking for directions, and I don't know if I'm alone in this, is that my brain, when I asked for directions, the moment the person would start telling me the directions, my brain would switch off, or they would go, "See, the thing is, you got to go down there, but this is very important. When you got that turn, don't take the first one, take the second one." And my brain was going, and I'd stop listening, right? The world's first map was the Dura Europus map, which dates from 235 AD approximately. It was found drawn on the inside of a Roman legionary shield, which is quite a clever idea when you think about it. But maps weren't that common. You kind of assume that because we then would have all this kind of atlases and street maps and kind of A to Zs, that maps were a common thing. But actually they weren't. In the medieval era, it was quite rare. You go to towns and places you didn't know. Again, you'd have to ask for directions. You were incredibly reliant on local knowledge. Accurate maps were a relatively recent thing. In fact, Ordnance Survey was the first time that you had a kind of reliable map. And what was Ordnance Survey used for? War. So when people, that's it, the ordnance, as in artillery, it was used for plotting, and that's kind of the origin of accurate maps. The really big change was the invention of kind of reliable street maps, because up until then you would go to any kind of big city and you basically get lost. You'd need a guide. I've lived in London my whole life, and it's a massive city. The thing is, before smartphones, we had something that was a pretty cool invention. You don't see them very often anymore. It was A to Z. There was also the Nicholson Street Finder. It's kind of a book with like the whole city in a sort of handy form that you could flip through. That was first developed in 1936. The Geographers A to Z Map Company, they published this thing. It was developed by Phyllis Purcell. She walked around and did these hand-drawn maps. They were revolutionary because they weren't necessarily to scale. Obviously, when you're walking around, you don't want the sort of Ordnance Survey map, which is kind of, the roads are absolutely tiny. Until like the 1986, it was published in black and white. Now, using a black and white map is fine during the day when it's not raining. Now, the other problem was with a printed map is if it was an old version that somebody had given you, that wouldn't be updated. What would happen is you could be in an area, maybe some new streets being built, and it literally would not be on the map. So you'd have no idea where you were. And sometimes what would also happen is the most important pages, the ones that you used a lot, would just simply fall out. Or, if you had annoying friends, as I definitely did, they would just rip the page out that they needed for that evening, and then you'd go and use it, and the page was missing. I'm in Rome, attempting to navigate without my phone, which I'm using to film now. Here I've got a map, and what I'm finding is when you're on a main road, and it's pretty straightforward, you know when you're going, it's no problem at all. But as soon as you walk down a small street like this, you get lost. And even though you thought you know where you're going, you're like, this is hopeless, I've no idea where I am. And I'm doing all right. I've been trying not to look at the map, and it's reflexive. I'll be going somewhere even I think, I kind of know where I'm going. But I'll be honest with you, it's kind of harder than I remember. What I did do today is ask directions because we wanted to get from the Vatican Museum to St. Peter's Basilica, and we asked 4 separate people where it was, 4 of them, and they all told us that you had to leave the Vatican Museum, leave the Vatican, and then follow the road round and go to the church, but I was convinced that the church was in the Vatican City itself and ignored this. So that was a real life experience of asking for directions, ignoring all of them, and it was only when the fifth person insisted and gave us very specific directions that I actually agreed. So we've all learned something today. I think that perhaps I'm very stubborn. I tried using the map, but it's ridiculously difficult, and also I was threatened with divorce by my wife, who has paid for most, well no, I say most, pretty much all of this trip to Rome for my birthday. So it's not worth it to prove a point about whether I can navigate with the map. Also, I can't. I've clearly failed because I've had to revert to using the phone in between doing these videos. So it was worth a go. I think the map does give you a different experience, but it's really hard at night, especially because you can't see, unless you're in a well-lit street, you can't see at all. That was a fun experience in Rome, that experience of using a map and how it works. Hope you enjoyed this video. I'm going to make a few more about sort of things that are a bit different, kind of comedy ideas that occurred to me. If you've enjoyed it, please do subscribe. If you want to comment on anything you enjoyed or something, this is and you disagree with it, something you'd like to hear a video, do please let me know. And thanks for sticking around.